I'm Armstrong Williams, and this is your voice, your future. You know what? I cannot tell you how satisfying it is that this election is about to finally be over, okay? I have received so many texts from Walz, Harris, Trump, Vance, Obama. I'm just telling you. And I feel as though I've been hacked. And listen, so many people have called on me on the speakerphone with their friends. Tell us your prediction. Tell us your prediction. Tell us who's going to win. It's as if it's the end of the world. And I'm just, you know what? I'm just so happy this time is here. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Your Voice and Your Future. I'm your moderator, Armstrong Williams. And I've already voted. Got that out the way. Kendra Woodall joins us. She's the politics editor at the Baltimore Sun, which I'm a principal, and I'm glad to have her on the set with us tonight. Joe Griffith is a research fellow, financial regulations at the Heritage Foundation, and Raynard Jackson is president and CEO of Raynard Jackson and Associates, LLC. So let me just start with you, Ken. You worked at many prominent publications throughout your life. We've seen these elections every 4 years come and go. Prognosticators make their predictions, pollsters make their predictions. But one thing for sure is that what the former President Trump, Hillary Clinton race taught us, that pollsters and pundits can get it wrong. What are you, from your experience, what are you looking at as you look at the land mass of this country? What do you think? What should we look for as people go and vote in an unprecedented way tomorrow?
I think we're looking at turnout, and there are already signs that turnout is high across the country. Even in Maryland, they've broken records for same-day voter registration, people walking in and getting registered that day to vote. We see encouraging signs in Georgia for early voting, North Carolina early voting. That's a good sign that democracy is working. For all the fears that we hear people talking about, that democracy is hanging in the balance, it seems to be working. People are voting, people are getting out there. I'm also looking at battleground districts in battleground states. I spent time the last 2 weekends a little bit looking at Allentown, Pennsylvania, Bethlehem, Northampton County, and in those areas, you know, what I was seeing is Kamala Harris is really strengthening her ground game there and closing out strong. And it's really a battle for people in Pennsylvania, where I worked for a very long time. And it's a battle choosing between an economic vote and a moral vote. And that doesn't always mean that the economic vote is always going to Trump and that the moral vote is always going to Harris. As you know, there are a lot of people who feel that Donald Trump is the way for the moral vote. So there is that tension, though, like out in these battleground states. The economy continues to be the #1 concern I hear from voters when I talk to voters across the country, and especially in Maryland. Immigration, abortion, healthcare, these are all issues that people care deeply about, and they're going to the polls, and turnout is going to make a huge difference.
Raynard, what are you hearing, and what are you looking at?
Well,
particularly when it comes to the House and the Senate.
Yeah, I think we should win the White House tomorrow night.
Who's we?
The Republicans, that's right.
Oh, yeah, make sure.
Yeah, Republicans should win the White House tomorrow night. And I think the Senate is a foregone conclusion.
No. Why do you think Trump will win the White House again?
Well, a couple of reasons. Number one, the economy. And I think the post-election analysis is going to be for the Harris campaign to think the singular issue of abortion was enough to get her over the hump with a flawed approach. When people, I was at the grocery store in D.C. 2 weeks ago, Armstrong, and this woman ahead of me, it was obvious she was paying for her groceries with an EBT card from the government, food stamps, and she started putting things back because she couldn't afford it. So she had to go from a gallon of milk to a half gallon of milk. I said, don't worry about it, I'll pay for the difference. But that struck me that's the experience of a lot of Americans, where they're debating whether to get a gallon of milk versus a half gallon, and the Democrats are talking about democracy and a threat to democracy and fascism and Hitler when people can't pay their bills. And so Trump has been pretty good, I think, on hammering home the economy, the border, and staying out of unnecessary wars. And I think that resonates not only with political junkies like you and I, Armstrong, but I think it resonates with just regular people who go to vote every election cycle, but are not political junkies like us. And so Trump has hit into a vein that resonates with the people. So I think that's why he'll win on the presidential level. And the Senate, I think will win. When you look at the map there, you look at, we've been competitive in Ohio. I think Casey in Pennsylvania is vulnerable. And all this will depend on, in my view, whether President Trump has coattails or not. And a race like Moreno in Ohio, I think if Trump wins Ohio, which is a red state, if Trump wins by 6 or 7 points, I think Moreno wins the Senate seat.
So before I go to Joel, let me come back to you, Candy. What is fascinating, there's no question that Trump's voters have made the case to vote for him. But many of the Harris voters did not make the case to vote for Harris because of her. They made the case to vote for her as a vote against Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. The case against Donald Trump, not for Kamala Harris. How does that play? Because we all know the Republicans surprisingly have done well in the early voting, but they, at the expense, they don't always do well at getting their troops out on election day. The Democrats have always done well at getting their ground troops out on election day. Obama showed that in his defeat of Mitt Romney. He was able to surge. Can the vice president repeat? They're still relatively unknown. She's never really had a clear message, but they're not voting for her. Many of them are voting against Donald Trump.
We saw the same thing in 2020. People were not voting for Joe Biden as much as they were voting against Donald Trump and how they felt he handled COVID. And in this election, I think we will see that dynamic repeat. There are a lot of people who feel like they don't know Kamala Harris very well yet, and so they're still voting against Trump or in prevention of a leadership they perceive the way that he would lead the country. And he now has a record. She has a record. And, you know, but they are doing a pretty good job, I think. You're mentioning the Harris campaign. They're doing a great job on the ground of getting people out. Lots of door knockers out this weekend in Pennsylvania. His campaign isn't doing that so much, but there have been tons of flyers, lots of mailers. They are reaching people in different ways. It's a small thing, but as you know, has an impact. Tomorrow, the weather is going to be quite nice, and that makes a difference if people come out or not. But I think people will make that decision, and many have already decided. There are still some undecideds. There are also people who have said that they've decided but could be persuaded in the last minute. And how are these campaigns closing out their messaging? Are they staying on message? And we know a lot of Republicans would like Trump to stay on message. I've talked to folks who said if he stays on an economic message, you know, in the last 48 hours, he could win. That's the number one issue. But if he talks about retribution out there, and she's the one talking about issues, she could win. It's that razor thin in some of these battleground states, according to polling. And there are so many little things that can make a difference. Thousands of Gaza supporters who said they will not vote for Harris. We'll see if they come home or not, if they end up supporting her. And we'll see if Trump improves on his margins in 2020 and how voters compare to 2016 as well with that turnout. But you mentioned Obama did it, but Clinton lost some of those Obama voters. She didn't get them to turn out for her in 2016, and it was a difference maker. And Biden brought some of them back, but he started to lose them in this campaign. Democrats were getting very nervous even before Biden dropped out about that. Even before that disastrous debate, they were worried about losing the Obama coalition in the Democratic Party. And as you know, Obama has been out there trying to bring that coalition home as well. So I'm very curious to see if that happens after Tuesday.
I'm gonna come back to you, Raynard, before I get to Joel. There's an elephant in the room who's literally has been living there for the last 2 weeks and in many ways passing out money. That is Elon Musk, which could offset the vice president's ground game. You never can underestimate somebody who's worth $200 billion. Raynard.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And what I find amazing, Armstrong, is the state court in Pennsylvania dismissed Krasner's charge that Elon Musk basically was violating the law there by offering $1 million to people who registered to vote in the state. But it's amazing, no one complained about Mark Zuckerberg in 2020 spending north of $100 million, but when someone on the Republican side does it, all of a sudden it's a national security issue. And I think Elon Musk is taking a calculated risk from a businessman's perspective, and he understands that it's better to be at the policy table than to be on the outside when there are going to be, whoever wins the presidency tomorrow night, there are going to be a lot of policies that involve the technology community that you need to be at the table on, or you're going to get your clock clean. So I think Elon Musk is being very practical, and I think he and Trump just get along greatly.
But I asked you a different question. How effective and what impact will he have in Pennsylvania?
Oh, I think he had a tremendous impact simply because that money is going for a ground game for tomorrow. And Elon Musk, has basically spent the past 2 weeks nonstop going throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so that money has been funding the ground game there in Pennsylvania. And Elon Musk is a very smart, savvy businessman, and he would not be putting this type of money into this campaign unless he thought he could make a difference.
So let me mention this. So we're just tomorrow away from election. And in Michigan, the races for the U.S. Senate and the 8th Congressional District are two of the hottest in this nation. Let's take a look.
We're just a day away from the election, and here in Michigan, the U.S. Senate and the 8th Congressional District are two of the hottest in the whole country. The Senate race is between Democrat Alyssa Slotkin and Republican Mike Rogers. Both are looking to succeed retiring incumbent Democrat Debbie Stabenow, who has held the seat since 2000. Alyssa Slotkin has a master's degree in international affairs. After college, she worked as an analyst with the CIA, serving 3 tours in Iraq. She also worked with the National Security Council. Mike Rogers served 4 years in the U.S. Army. After the military, he worked as a special agent with the FBI before turning to a career in politics, where he served in the Michigan State Senate for 5 years and the U.S. House of Representatives for 14 years. Democrat Alyssa Slotkin supports restoring women reproductive rights, creating an assault weapons ban, and securing the border, arguing that Republicans failed to sign the bipartisan border bill. Republican Mike Rogers is pro-life but does not support a national abortion ban. He's pro-gun and wants to secure the border, saying the bipartisan border bill was, quote, a terrible bill. If Rogers wins the Senate race, he would be the first Michigan Republican to do so in more than 3 decades. If Slotkin wins, she would become the youngest female Democrat in the Senate. The 8th Congressional District race is between Democrat Kristen McDonald-Rivet and Republican Paul Young. They're seeking to succeed the retiring Democrat Dan Kildee, who's been in Congress since 2012. Kristen McDonald-Rivet has a master's degree in public administration. She held a leadership position at several businesses before becoming a state senator in 2022. Paul Young has a master's degree from the University of Michigan. He worked in the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services under the Trump administration. He is pro-life, a gun rights supporter, and wants to bring back jobs to Michigan. Kristen McDonald-Rivet supports protecting women reproductive rights, lowering housing costs, and lowering prescription drug prices. If Rivet wins, the Democrats would hold onto a seat the party has held since 1959. If Young wins, it would be the first time in a half-century that a Republican would represent Flint. Like the presidential race, the Senate and congressional races here in Michigan are very close, and the outcomes could play a pivotal role in determining the balance of power on Capitol Hill. Reporting in Flint, Kyle Macon, back to you, Armstrong.
Thank you, Kyle. That's from our WEYI NBC 21 affiliate. When we come back, we got to get Joel in on the conversation. Your voice, your future. And welcome back. All eyes are on Pennsylvania for a handful of reasons this election season. Not only is the swing state playing a huge role in who will be the 47th president of the United States, it also has a race that could possibly give Republicans the majority in the Senate. Our Elise Person breaks down the numbers for the PA in the U.S. Senate race.
In Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate race, Republican candidate Dave McCormick is taking on Democratic Senator Bob Casey. Now, this is a race that's going to be catching national attention as it has the possibility to flip the U.S. Senate majority. With less than a day left until voters head out to the polls, Real Clear polling shows Bob Casey pulling ahead of Dave McCormick by just over 2 points. Democratic political insider Mark Single says he believes those numbers are right on par.
Bob Casey is going to win this between 3 and 4% of the vote in Pennsylvania. That's not huge, but it is beyond the margin of error. So this definitely was his toughest challenge, but I think he's going to win.
But Republican political insider Charlie Giroux says McCormick has picked up speed as we head towards Election Day.
Campaigns like football games are run on momentum, and Dave McCormick clearly has the momentum.
According to Real Clear polling in mid-August, Casey was pulling ahead in the polls by nearly 8 points. But since then, the polls have tightened.
I think you'll see an upset. I think Dave McCormick is going to win this seat. He's been the little engine that could throughout the campaign, just chipping away at the Casey lead, and I think he's now overtaken him.
The economy has been a top issue for voters this election season. Senator Casey says taking on corporate greed will put money back in Americans' pockets.
Bring price gouging investigations, hold them accountable, and also roll back those big corporate tax breaks. It's one way to combat the higher prices that families have seen for food and household items.
Whereas McCormick says he's looking to cut wasteful spending, oppose tax increases, and create more jobs.
I went to Ranger School, 82nd Airborne Division, combat tour in Iraq, and came back to Pittsburgh and helped run a company that created hundreds of jobs. I have lived the American dream. The America I know is not the America I see right now.
Now, both Casey and McCormick, they're going to be watching the numbers as they come in on election night from their hometowns. McCormick will be in Pittsburgh. Casey will be in Scranton. Elise Person in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Back to you, Armstrong.
And thank you. Let me bring in Joel Griffith. Just how are these economic issues playing out in the lives of everyday Americans who don't really see how while we have this economy that continues to get stronger and stronger compared to the rest of the world, it's not playing out in the lives of everyday Americans, Joel?
You're exactly right, Armstrong. And the bottom line is that over the past 3.5 years, American families have experienced the biggest economic setback dating back to the early 1980s as Jimmy Carter left the White House. We've seen American families on average lose around $3,000 per year in inflation-adjusted income, and that's not even including the housing crisis, and it truly is a crisis. If you compare the all-in annual housing costs today for a standard home and property taxes and insurance, a home today is costing middle-class families $23,000 more each year compared to where it was a few years ago. So families right now are experiencing some very tough times. And despite the fact that the stock market is doing well and the 401ks are doing well, if you're one of the tens of millions of American families that are living paycheck to paycheck, the fact is you're likely going into debt and taking out loans on your home equity line to pay the bills. And that's a big part of this country.
You know, how significant is the suburban vote in this election? Are they leaning towards a particular party based on economic or social concerns?
Sure. I mean, the suburbs are everything. You could say all areas matter in an election on the margins, but what we do know is that the suburbs are sort of like the battlegrounds of the battlegrounds. And this year, in the suburbs, voters are definitely breaking for Republicans when it comes to the economy, and they're breaking for Democrats when it comes to health care and some of the social concerns, concerns of democracy also. But you really, and they're also breaking for Republicans on the border. I meet voters every day who say they're mostly concerned about the economy and the border. And of course there are differences in how those things should be handled. But on election night, everybody's going to be watching how the suburbs around Philadelphia are voting, and places also like Erie and the suburbs around Pittsburgh, when we're talking about Pennsylvania. And you know, you can, in every battleground state, there are suburbs like that that we're going to be watching to see how they're leaning. And we know that people are favoring Republicans on the economy and the border. Is that going to be what makes them vote for Republicans on Tuesday? We'll see.
You know, we have to realize, though, that Pennsylvania is like three different voting identities. You have Philadelphia, you have Pittsburgh, and then you have the suburbs and the rural of Pennsylvania. And listen, they could not be more apart. Raynard, what are some of the broader economic or social issues you see resonating across diverse communities in this election?
Oh, the biggest issue by far, Armstrong, is this issue of illegal immigration and how they're going into inner city communities, displacing the jobs that are in those cities, depressing wages, but also, Armstrong, as you know, when you have an influx of people like that, it increased the cost of housing, both rental and home ownership. And so a lot of these diverse communities, Armstrong, are really bearing the brunt of open borders, and that has all kind of economic implications. And the reason these folks in the inner cities, Armstrong, are leaning towards Trump is because Trump is in the process of realigning the voting electorate. These communities are not voting Republican, Armstrong, they're voting Donald Trump. And there's a big difference between the two. But if Trump wins tomorrow night, he is going to realign the voting demographics for a generation.
You know, Joe, if we see a change in congressional control, particularly the House, what might that mean for the economy and financial markets in the short term?
Well, if we have a President Harris next year, but we see a change of control of Congress to full Republican control, this could operate as a powerful check on some of her worst ideas. If you look at what her policies have been when it comes to antitrust and the Federal Trade Commission and tax policy, a lot of the worst ideas that she's proposed actually would require congressional approval. And that includes mass amnesty. You cannot have mass amnesty without Congress getting involved. So Congress could go a long way to stopping some of the worst damage to the economy should Vice President Harris win the White House.
So you know, Ken, it's very interesting. I look at this pollster in Iowa who always gets it right. And yet she has two congressional races, Meek is one of them, where clearly the GOP thinks that they're going to win. And yet, while she favors Harris by 3 percentage points and the margin of error which she calculates in there, she's the only pollster that has come to that conclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That poll sent shockwaves over the weekend, and there were a lot of analysts saying they think she is a great pollster, but that this was a bad poll. But I think there are campaigns, I think certainly if you're a Democrat, you might want to believe that poll. And if that poll's true, then we're looking at a much different return on Tuesday night than close races that every other poll has predicted. So, I mean, I think a lot of people were stunned by that poll. But in an election where anything is possible, that's possible too.
Joe, what are some of the issues? Do you think people separate the border from the economy? And it seems to be an albatross around the vice president's neck.
Yeah, I think most people do separate the two. These are two very, they can be linked, but these are two very real, I would say, different problems. We know that with the border, the primary issue with the border problem are that a lot of urban areas especially are suffering from an influx of violent crime. Chicago, Portland, New York City are cases in points. The economy for a lot of Americans is a separate issue, and that's because a lot of smaller communities, they're not actually dealing firsthand with the illegal immigration problem. If you look at some of the suburban areas of Columbus, Ohio, for instance, Indianapolis, they're not as inundated with illegal immigration. For those individuals, it really does come on down more to the economy. People know that they're feeling the pinch right now. It's been continuing for 3 years, and they want relief. Of course, one of my fears are that we have seen very little in the way of solutions to our long-term federal deficit from either political candidate. And those long-term deficits are going to wreak havoc on our economy in the medium and long term. And we need a solution now in order to minimize that pain.
So I know we're going to lose Raynard at the end of the segment. Raynard, your final thoughts on your overview of this. What is at stake tomorrow?
Well, I think what's at stake tomorrow is the direction of this country. While America is a very welcoming country, Armstrong, I think the Democrats have misread the feeling of the electorate with this unconditional open border, and I think the Democrats have offered no solution, and they have just not spoken directly to the American people as to how they want to change and go in a different direction for the American people and what specifically those policies are. And so this is a change electorate right now, in my view, and change is going to be in the form of Donald Trump winning re-election tomorrow night.
When we come back, Joe Paul will join this set along with Joe Griffith, who will remain in Camden Woodall. Raynard, it's always a pleasure seeing you. We'll be back on Your Voice, Your Future.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence, there's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion. And that is, there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Today, both Trump and Harris are in Pennsylvania. Here's a live update from Jasmine Brooks at the Trump rally.
We are here at the Trump rally in Reading, Pennsylvania, and it is already energetic. Doors open at 10 a.m. I found two supporters with me. We have Yopi and Sophie. I'm going to start with you. This is your first rally.
Yeah, this is my first rally.
Tell me about why you decided to show up today.
Well, first of all, I know Trump before even he became a president. So I used to follow, his apprentice. So I already knew him. And then when he was saying, he wants to become a president, I said, well, it's good, because he's a businessman. He can run the country just as good as what he's doing with his businesses, So when he turned into become a candidate for the president the first time, I know he backed out, the first time. And the second time, since he went through it, so I voted for him,
You're ready. You're back and ready for a second presidency.
Exactly. I've been supporting him, since the beginning, and I'll be back again to vote for him, for sure. And I'm not a I'm not a Republican, but I'm independent. But I'm voting for him for the President of the United States.
He was a businessman. He said, "Tell me, Sophie, this is not your first rally. I can see you have your gear ready, right? Why did you decide to come back for another rally? Because it is hopping inside."
I mean, it's the energy that he gives and demonstrates to the country what he stands for. Is putting America first, and that's what we believe in as patriots to this country, to this great nation.
Is there anything that you hope to hear from him with Election Day tomorrow and this being one of his last rallies?
I am in it to win it here with him. I can't wait. I just hope he has the inspiration to follow along and continue those promises that he made. And his promises made, promises kept. And I am a first-generation Cuban American. My parents came from communism, and coming here to this great land, one of the best countries in the world, to live that American dream. Dream big. That's what we want. Dream big and live that American moment.
And we have a Republican and independent both voting for Trump, both excited about this rally ahead of Election Day happening tomorrow. For now, reporting in Reading, I'm Candace Scalise. Back to you, Armstrong.
Joe Paul, do you actually think the young lady at the rally who was such an advocate was Trump, is subservient to her husband, being told what to do, has no mind of her own, and being manipulated? I mean, the description, in the ad, I've seen the ad as if women are being weak. I mean, you have to admit, that's just, do you see this desperation, such demeaning to women?
I think that it can go either way, right? I think everybody has an opportunity to make their own choices when they get into that voting booth. I don't think anybody should be cajoled or convinced otherwise. This is part of your democratic duty and your civic engagement to actually get out and vote. I also don't think that women need to be told what to do or what not to do. I don't think they need to be told what to do in the voting booth or with their bodies, right? And so you're hearing a lot of rhetoric around people saying, hey, you shouldn't tell your husband, or you should. None of that matters, right? What matters is you should vote your conscience, vote what's best for you. You should elect a candidate who speaks to the immediate needs of you and your constituency, and that should be it.
What about this factor of men not supporting the president? And you can tell that they've put a lot of resources in trying to shoulder up her support with men around the country. Is it because she's a woman, you think? Is it because of her policy? Is there so much they don't know about her? What do you think the issue, and is she closing the gap with men?
I think she's closing the gap with men. I think that, look, in my household, my wife runs the show, okay? And in a lot of households, that's the same, right? Doesn't mean that I'm any less or I can't contribute, but she runs the show. And that means that Kamala Harris also has the opportunity to run the show. I don't see a lot of men coming out who are saying, oh, Kamala can't do it because she's a woman. I mean, she has a demonstrated history of leadership. This is not her first rodeo, right? She started out as an attorney general, then Senate, then vice president, and so she's quite qualified to be president of the United States. And so I don't think it has anything to do with gender, but more policies, right? Now, if you don't agree with her policies, it's a different story. If you don't agree with her because she's a woman, then there's something wrong with you.
Ken, one of the criticisms of the VP is that she does not have a clear message. What is her message?
Well, lately her message has been her to-do list. She has 14 items that she's focusing on, that she says Trump has a retribution list and I have a to-do list. So that has been sort of new messaging for her in the last couple weeks. And it seems to be helping her close out stronger than she was running before. As you know, she had a huge bump after Biden dropped out and then after the DNC. But since then, after Labor Day, she's struggled in the polls a little bit. She's not gaining. But in these last few weeks, she's been able to close out much stronger. Her message has not been clear. She has struggled to define herself separate of Biden, which is a problem for her among voters. Another speaker on here said that this is a change election, and it is. But voters have been wanting change from the 2020 ticket of Biden and Trump. And the question that will be answered on Tuesday is, did people link Harris to Biden, or could they see her as her own candidate?
You know, Joe, it's fascinating. People really believe that President Biden's garbage comment has really hurt the vice president going into the final week of the campaign. But I think there's something deeper there, and I don't want to read too much in it. I saw a flash of anger and resentment in the president, as if he still feels that he's the person who is best suited to defeat Donald Trump. And I don't think he's over the angst of being forced out of office. But I think the president knew exactly what he was saying, and he absolutely said it. But I think the mainstream media refuses to delve a little deep about what really goes on behind closed doors, because you really don't see Biden really out front. He's very low key in the last few weeks of this election. Joel?
Well, the timing of President Biden's disparagement of nearly half the population as trash was certainly suspect. I was in Washington, D.C. that night, and if I remember correctly, those remarks occurred almost at the exact same time that Vice President Harris was delivering remarks to tens of thousands of people outside the White House. And President Biden, quite frankly, he stole the thunder with those very mistimed remarks. I think more broadly is Americans want a return to civility. If you contrast what President Biden said about Trump supporters the other night with the remarks that J.D. Vance gave not too long ago on national television, when he was talking about how we should not be discarding our family and friends simply because we have different politics. I think that's the message that resonates with the American people. We might choose different political candidates or different parties, even during this pivotal election, but we should not be choosing our friendships or relationships based on the candidate that we select tomorrow afternoon.
You know, Joe, listen, it's one thing to talk about the president and the vice president and their rhetoric, but none are more divisive than Donald Trump and the things that he says, and he gets away with it. And he's normalized it. I mean, the things it's just amazing that Donald Trump has totally changed the body politic. It will never be the same. He's lowered the standards for being elected. I mean, some people will say, if someone like Donald Trump can become president of the United States, anybody can win. And so it's very easy for him to sit back and criticize the remarks that Biden and anybody else makes when he does the very same thing himself.
Well, look, Armstrong, it's true, of course, that Donald Trump did win one presidential campaign despite some of the incivility. But we have so many examples in prior elections and also in current Senate races and House races where the candidates with more decorum and more civility actually do far better than the more bombastic characters. So I'm not convinced that even if former President Trump were to win tomorrow, I don't know that that's going to set the tone for future candidates.
Let me stop you a minute, Joe. Joe, does that bother you?
It definitely bothers me.
Should it bother the American people?
It absolutely does bother the American people, right? You have to understand, the garbage comments didn't start at Joe Biden, right? He was responding to the comedian who was at the Madison Square Garden at the Love Fest, so to speak, who called the Puerto Rican island an island of garbage, right? How dare you call American citizens garbage? It didn't start there, right? Donald Trump has been able to get away with murder, literally, right? He's been able to say whatever he wants in any way that he wants. And the bar for Donald Trump is so low, and in fact, it's non-existent. And so you have Kamala Harris on the other side who's actually running, and she has to be perfect. She has to be absolutely flawless. But Donald Trump gets to get away with saying whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and no one checks him. That is insane to me, right? Are we living in the same reality, right? What Joe Biden said was out of line, period. No American citizens should be called outside of their names, period. However, he was responding to a statement that was made at the Madison Square Garden. And that was not the only statement that was made that was insane, right? That comedian made jokes about African Americans, he made jokes about other minorities, and guess what? Those comments have to be approved before they even make it to the stage. And Donald Trump went on 2 minutes after and didn't say anything. He also had an opportunity to respond and say, hey, those comments, we reject them. He did not do that. He missed that opportunity. So let's not act like Donald Trump isn't out here spewing vitriolic hate and insane rhetoric.
Well, maybe during the time he saw nothing wrong with it until he saw the blow up, and that his handlers had to tell him to say something. Maybe that's what it was. That's just maybe my interpretation. Because if I were on that stage and someone made a comment like that, given my character, I would condemn it immediately. Absolutely. Listen, Joe Griffith, thank you for joining us. Joe and Ken is coming back, and Pastor A.R. Bernard is going to join us as we talk about morality and character in this election. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
We're going live to Joel Smith reporting from the Harris rally in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
I tell you what, Armstrong, here at Muhlenberg College in beautiful Allentown, this place is going to be packed, but that doesn't say a lot. Take a look around. It's a Division III school, a small basketball gym, and very steep stands will be packed with a few thousand people. But here's the thing. They have a overflow room that will have probably 5 times as many people also there. This line was around this entire community for blocks. I've never seen a Harris rally with this many people in line. Frankly, it felt like a Trump rally when you're talking about pure numbers, and they feel confident. I said, why is that? Well, they love the poll numbers they're getting from some other states and from Pennsylvania, which are very close, but some of them like the ones that they're seeing. They also say their topics are abortion, democracy, and the unity vibe that they get from the Harris campaign they don't see in the Trump campaign. As for this area, it is Allentown. It is 54% Latino. This county also very Latino, and that is one of those demographics that in a very close race could make the difference. We'll see what happens this time, but I tell you what, a lot of energy here, and just one of these many stops that Kamala Harris is making today, going across this battleground state of Pennsylvania that everybody believes is the Keystone State for the reason to win the election as well. I'm here in Allentown, Joel D. Smith. Armstrong, back to you.
Thank you, my man Joel. I'm so proud of our reporters across the country reporting from Michigan and Pennsylvania. Kudos to you guys and women for doing a fantastic job. Pastor A.R. Bernard, pastor of Christian Culture Center out of New York, is joining us now. What has happened to morality, character, integrity, honor, and decency in this election, Pastor Bernard?
Armstrong, I will tell you, that's a good question. We're asking that as clergy. What happened to it? At one time, it was our guide in determining the political candidates that we would vote for. And now that's been thrown out the window, I think, because of the climate that we're in. It's interesting, you talk about morality. There was an article in the New York Times, and it talked about individuals who were very successful in their careers in the corporate world who are now leaving and enrolling in Harvard, not for law or anything else, but Harvard Divinity School. And it's because they're in a moral crisis. They are now asking questions about how do we determine right from wrong? What's the purpose and meaning of life? So I think we're in a moral crisis in our nation.
You know, I must tell you, Joe Paul, when the vice president said she would do some very specific things for black men, and one of the things she mentioned was legalizing marijuana. I said, did she lose her mind? I mean, what's happening with these people? Who's advising them? Joe?
Yeah, you know, let me tell you, the good news is, I'll give you both sides, because the good news is, for the first time in history, there's a candidate who's running for president who has an agenda, a policy agenda for black men. That's never happened before.
Legalizing marijuana?
I don't agree with that part.
Okay.
However, what I will say is this. It's not as comprehensive as we'd like, right? Legalizing marijuana may not help black men that much. Now, if you release all
help
the black men,
is not going to help anybody in the long run.
In the long run, it may not. Now, here's the thing. If you allow these black men who have been imprisoned because of marijuana to legally participate and earn revenue from from opening up shops, dispensary, et cetera, and putting those skills to good use, that's a different story. But legalizing marijuana, I'm not sure where that's going. I mean, I think that will benefit everyone, or is supposed to benefit everyone, not particularly black men.
You know, go ahead, Pastor.
I was just going to say, you know, up in New York, that was an issue taken on by Ken Thompson, who became the first black district attorney for Brooklyn. And the idea was that there's a disproportionate number of black men who end up incarcerated because of low-level marijuana crimes. So by legalizing marijuana, the objective was to deal with all of those low-level crimes. And of course, they're coming out of prison with a record, and difficult for them to get back into society because of it.
You know, Ken, from a journalistic perspective, how have you seen political leaders address or fail the moral concerns of our nation?
I think they've failed. I think both parties have failed to address the moral concerns of the nation. And let's start with Trump first. From fine people on both sides to not immediately condemning what the comedian said on that stage, which was not funny. And it could cost votes, quite frankly. And then for Democrats, I feel like they haven't learned enough from the past, that they spend a lot of time pointing fingers and saying, well, Trump said this and Trump said that, and Trump doesn't sound like a president. That has worked for him. His supporters like that he doesn't sound like a president. They like that he sounds, that he doesn't sound presidential. They like that he's unscripted. That has worked for him. But I think Democrats should focus more, and Joe Biden was good at this when he was running in 2020. I think they need to focus more and try to talk to people more about their economic struggles, instead of saying things like, you know, the numbers are getting better and the numbers are improving. Talk to people who are putting groceries away in line. Talk to people who still have to decide between buying meat that week or just getting pasta again, because a box of pasta is a lot cheaper. I don't think they're connecting enough, you know, to people on a really human level about what they're going through daily.
You know, Pastor Raynard, moral striving and the morals and character of a nation is inextricably linked to the success of that nation. I don't care who's in the White House, what your economic policies are, your immigration policy. Morality matters, and it has been what has doomed many great nations of the past.
You know, Armstrong, religion brings a moral value consensus to society, which is necessary for concord, for justice, and issues like that. And churches, houses of worship become pivotal centers for moral guidance and social support. And I think that when we lose that moral guidance, we lose the anchor for our souls. And when we lose the anchor for our souls, we have nothing to protect us from what we can become when our humanity takes over. When our humanity kicks in, Armstrong, unfortunately, we can give in to the forces of greed and fear and ambition and lust for power, and the list goes on and on and on. So it's very, very important that we understand that a society will collapse without an anchor for the soul.
Joe Paul, why is this election so razor-thin close?
You know, it depends on what polls you're taking a look at, right? Some have Kamala Harris leading in many of the swing states. Some have Trump about by 1 or 2 points. But it's razor thin because, one, a lot of folks don't know who Kamala Harris is, even after 100 days of running. But this is a sequel to Trump's original movie. It's razor thin because there isn't much change that's happened over the past 10 years, right? And so people really want change. They want a difference in their neighborhoods. They want to make sure that they can afford health care. They want to make sure that they can buy their homes. They want to make sure that their streets are safe. So it's thin because you don't know which side to lean on. But again, Kamala Harris has only had a little over 100 days to run and prepare a campaign to be successful, right? Donald Trump has had 9 years, right? And so it's thin because people don't know where to turn. But I tell you, there's a difference for this election because democracy is absolutely on the ballot. Morality and decency is on the ballot, and freedom is absolutely on the ballot. So it may not be as razor thin as you think. I think we're going to know tomorrow and maybe leading into Wednesday or Thursday who the next president of the United States will be.
You know, Ken, for as much as said about this election, the one thing that the vice president has not been able to do is differentiate herself from her boss.
Mm-hmm. This is true. She has struggled to do that. And with her own comments, when she was on The View, of course, they had asked her, you know, what would she do differently from Biden? And she said, you know, she couldn't think of a thing. And I think that could haunt her a little bit. That has run in ads over and over in battleground states. And Joe Biden remains deeply unpopular. And Trump also has his favorability in the negatives, but that's actually less negative than it was in 2016 and 2020. And so she has not communicated an effective message to the country of why her administration would be different. She has since tried to answer that, but I think she waited a little too long to start doing interviews with media, and that would have helped her a little bit more in this campaign, maybe coming out of the DNC and doing these sit-downs pretty quickly.
Pastor, your final thoughts? You have the last word.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you know, in today's polarized climate, the question, you know, is not who you're voting for. What they're really asking is whose side are you on? Because it's become more pertinent than simply who are you voting for. Armstrong, the shifts reflect the deepening cultural ideological divides in American society. Voting now represents more than a choice between candidates. It's a signal of identity, values, and allegiances. Thomas Sowell said it so aptly when he said it's a clash of visions, moral order and traditional values versus social change. And we're not doing well with the tension between those two.
You know, I want to thank Joel Griffith, Raynard Jackson. I want to thank Joe here on the set with us and Candy on the set. WGLA 24/7, your voice, your future. The only thing we can encourage you to do, if you want to change, you must be that change by going out to vote. I voted. I took somebody with me to vote. The key is those that have never voted before have a reason to vote, that you will get something out of it instead of being ignored for the next 4 years. Thank you for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. By this time next week, we'll know the victor. And to the victor belongs the spoils. We're out of here.